Welcome to Navigating Education, the podcast. The podcast that can help educators from around the world navigate not only the present, but also the future. Through discussions of instruction, EdTech, policy, and school leadership, we're here to connect with you and educators from around the world to help them amplify student learning for the betterment of our students and their future. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to episode number 58 of Navigating Education, the podcast. We're going to be talking about learner accessibility tonight with a integration of EdTech to really help our learners and meet their needs as teachers. And I'm here joined by Stacey Roshan, who's an expert in this, and she's done so many things related to accessibility, EdTech integration. She's someone that I've followed for quite a while on Twitter. She has a book that I've definitely read, and it's she's doing a lot of amazing things, and she's a great person to talk about this. So as someone that has taught multilingual learners, special education, I feel like learner accessibility and differentiation go hand in hand. And I think a lot of people just need to realize is that with the tools and strategies that we have, we can really differentiate, but we can also do things that we've never been able to do. Say, for example, with someone that has dyslexia, we can use applications now that can really help students read now on a screen. There's a lot of Chrome extensions now. There's even work regarding digraphia. There's tools like Mote, which you're going to probably discuss for multilingual learners, as well as just to have the audio piece. But there's just so much now available. And it's just a matter of, I've always had the philosophy of think less is more, building that in your toolkit. So it's really, really just something that we need to continue to build upon, teach within teacher education programs, as well as just in general through building capacity and coaching, and just really having understanding of, how can we use these tools? How can we integrate them with some other tools and strategies that we're using? So definitely excited to pick your brain and talk more about it. So as we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself, Stacey, and tell us a little bit about, your journey in education and how'd you get to where you are now?
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me and for, wanting to dive into this topic that really does, dig so deep at what I'm passionate about sharing and discussing. So my journey, I started in education 16 years ago. I actually studied economics all through school. I always loved math, and economics was kind of applied math. And then I found myself in teaching. My mom's actually a math teacher, kind of followed in her footsteps. She gave me a lot of great inspiration over the years and, gave me a love of math early on. And when I started teaching, in particular, teaching AP Calculus, I found that, I wasn't the teacher that I had been imagining in my head, because I was really running out of time in the classroom because there was so much content to get through and not enough time to really sit with students on an individual level every day. And I wanted a way to connect with my learners and get to understand them, and also ease the anxiety, particularly in that high level math class that I was teaching, and help students really build their confidence. That's always what I wanted to do in my math teaching. And so that was when I really started looking to technology to be a piece of my solution. I discovered screencasting. I decided to flip my classroom. And that was the first piece for me. That was the first piece of really putting more ownership on students, but really being able to then shift to the role of facilitator to help them know what to do with these tools that I was giving them, these resources that I was giving them, so that they were able to customize the pace of their learning. And then in the classroom, I could really make it more student driven. I could make it more around what students needed, because I could preload myself with this information from the analytics that I was getting through the videos that they were watching, so that I was able to walk into class and really make it about their needs. And that was just a start for me. Video was just the start. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about how it really shifted what participation looked like and felt like as I was able to onboard more tools.
So when you started your career, did you use technology in your class, or was it very limited and kind of more just a traditional paper pencil type mathematics class?
Yeah, so I started teaching in 2007, and I would not say that I like fully integrated technology in any way. I mean, back then students weren't bringing any type of device to school. Most of my students, I think all my students had something at home that they were using, and we had like a website for our classes, but it was just there wasn't really the whole learning management system thing or anything like that until a couple years into my teaching already. I was I was lucky that I had, from the beginning of my teaching, I had digital inking. So my school had tablet PCs that they gave us. And so I started with digital inking. And because I got into digital inking from the very beginning of my teaching, that made it made it a no-brainer that when I discovered how to screencast, I already kind of had some tools in my tool belt to make that happen because I was already doing that component. But I wouldn't say that I was integrating tech fully at all. And things really did start changing much more holistically when students started bringing devices to class. And I was lucky that I was earlier in the game as a school that I had that access to every student bringing a laptop to class, because I think that really shifts what you're able to do in terms of like really engagement participation in the classroom with laptops.
So were you ever, growing up, were you into technology, computers, gaming, or that type of stuff? Or did it just come when you started teaching, or it just came easy to you when you started to incorporate that over time?
I've always been interested. So I went to a math science, computer science magnet program in middle school and in high school. And so again, like I was very lucky. I had computer science curriculum integrated into my curriculum from grades 7, 8, 9, and 10. It was a requirement for all of us in that program. And then I chose to take it in 11th grade and 12th grade in addition. So I always was really interested in that computer science aspect. And while I didn't pursue computer science much, I did take it a little bit in college, but I always was interested in I would do little things of coding. And I wouldn't say I'm a coder by any means now, but I think that having that core foundation gave me that problem solving, like almost engineering way of looking at things. And I would say that's part of like my success as a teacher too, and why my integration of EdTech, like I've had that same approach of like really starting with like that problem spot and then looking to some tech as a solution and kind of, it's backwards design. It's also engineering, that problem solving kind of technique. And so, I never formally studied any of these things, but they all were very integrated into my way of learning because of that background in that magnet program. So I think that has been a helpful way of like framing problems and solutions and looking for solutions.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it all comes down to that exposure piece. I think that many of us growing up, whether you had it in school or you were interested in those various outlets where you wanted to make videos or where you wanted to create a website, you had that opportunity to hopefully expose yourself to it. And if you had the tools and expose yourself, and you had that yearning to want to learn, you kind of picked it up. And over time, I feel like it's just like with anything else. It's just you build those basic skills, and then you can then take those problems that you're alluding to, and then hopefully you can figure out with the toolbox that you have to solve them. So that's definitely, I think that I don't say that every person that has been exposed to technology though has that though. I think you really have to build it over time. And it's just funny that when you meet different generations and different groups of people, it's the varying levels of that digital literacy and the ability to, harness technology in ways to solve problems. It's just really interesting. And speaking of when, your journey of, that background of computer science, as well as just using technology from a young age, in your educational career, when did you really start thinking about that accessibility piece? Was it something, we always were taught in, teacher prep programs, differentiate, as well as, we have students at 504 or IEPs in their class. We need to somehow make our curriculum, accessible and meet their service needs. But really, when did you start taking ed tech and really trying to use it to your advantage to make the content that you were teaching them, especially if it's a difficult, math concepts, accessible to your learners?
Yeah. And it's funny because I would say that my first real journey into this was with my AP calculus class. And sometimes when I say that, people will think like, oh, in that classroom, like maybe you need it less than maybe, when I was teaching my Algebra 1 class, when people would think that you might need it more. And I think that, first of all, I think that's like a bit of like, there's not, I understand why that conception might be there, but I don't think there's a lot of truth in that. In my AP calculus class, I've had classrooms where I've needed it to be more accessible than any other class that I've taught. I've had a lot of learning accommodations in my AP calculus class. And I think those accommodations, sometimes, student accommodations that you need to have, sometimes push you to really grow as an educator because you need to accommodate something. And then you think of things that you weren't thinking of in the first place. Like, how do I make the notes accessible to everybody? How do, for some of my students who have different processing needs, how do I make it so that I am making my classroom discussion accessible for all my different learners and all the different processors? And so especially my AP calculus class, again, like that's been the root of a lot of my learning. And, I had some students who were they were going to do well, period. They were going to do well because they pushed themselves to a degree that like, this was like part of who they were. They were wonderful students, but how was I able to give them the tools to make them be able to really maximize their learning and reduce some of that anxiety for them? And that was a really important component to me personally, because I was that student that was very anxious and that was also going to do like 110%. But at what cost does it come at, right? So how could I maybe change the classroom a little bit for that student who is going to work and overwork, but make it so that I can put tools into their hands so that it can just be a better learning environment than something that I could have had as a student because I didn't have access to that same technology. My teachers didn't have access to that same technology. So again, like this is where the beginning of video got really interesting for me, because I can now so easily create a video that a student can watch at different speeds. And just that simple ability to be able to change the playback speed for students, I think is huge, because I have certain students who are always going to watch at 1.5 speed. And I have other students who need to watch that video, pause that video, and it's going to take them, if it's a 10-minute video, it's going to take them a minimum of 15 minutes to watch the video. So, I have all these different, like, this is a very simple little tiny thing, right? Adjusting the playback speed. But even when currently I assign videos in Edpuzzle. And one of the first things that I show my students is the Chrome extension that allows you to change the playback speed, the video speed controller. I think it's video speed controller, the Chrome extension. I use it all the time myself because it really allows you to subtly change the playback speed. Like I can use some keyboard shortcuts, the S and the D, and it will speed up and slow down at 0.1 increments, which is much more subtle than like even what you can do in, in YouTube itself. And
Oh, wow.
and you can easily do it. So when I'm watching a video, sometimes I'll be watching it and be like, the presenter's just doing some background and I want to speed that up a little bit, but then they get to a point where they're really showing something and I want to see that. And I want to just be able to dig into that. And I just press SSS and it slows it down even to 0.8 speed so that I can just see it and only have to watch it once, instead of sometimes you watch those explainers and you just have to watch it 2 or 3 times over. But it was really, if you could slow that video down, you could actually just watch it once. So I know I'm really digging into this, but I find that very important for me as a learner. I really like watching things. I'm a very oral type of, like, that's my best way of, I listen and that's my best way of consuming information. So I think playback speed is really important. It's another, you had mentioned Moat before as just audio. If you don't want to do video and just do audio, well, Moat also does that same thing. It has built-in 0.8 speed, 1x speed, 1.2, 1.5 that's built right in there, easy to toggle between the playback speed. And I think it's just like, to me, it's something very important and something that I use a lot of, and I do show my students too. Some teachers don't like showing the different playback speeds. They're, like, they think that, oh, I don't want my students to be using this tool that's going to allow them to speed it up. But for me, I think what I've seen, especially in a class like an AP Calculus class, it's important. Some students really do, like 1.5x speed, they're able to engage better. They're able to hold their, it holds their attention better, and they're able to get through it quicker because that's what they need. And then other students, that would not work for them. It would just be too fast.
No, definitely. And I love how you mentioned just the speed. And I mean, I've just used the one on YouTube, and then I always recommend teachers use closed captions. And what's nice is that with the closed captions as well as the speed, you can alter and help learners, get that information, at the speed in which that they need to consume. And also with Mode as well as YouTube, what I really like is that you can change the language now as well, so you can get that for multilingual learners and get their mother tongue and their language. So I think that it's huge. Just that simple piece there with that speed can really be game changing for a learner. And I want to ask you real quickly. You talked about flipped classroom earlier on. When did you start adopting the flipped classroom model or in blended learning in general? And when did you start using the LMS as well as the video component into your class instruction?
Yeah, I started flipping my classroom in 2010. And I went fully in AP Calculus. The flipped classroom wasn't yet a term. So I just told my students, I learned about screencasting, and for this first unit, I think that it will be best for you if, we do these videos and then you come to class and we're able to do the problems. And students weren't yet, they had never seen anything like this. They weren't sure yet, but they were like, for this first chapter, when it's kind of review anyway, I'm game. Like, let's do this. Let's try it out. And so I had made a whole 1 unit of videos because I wanted to hear students' feedback before I made all of my videos. So they immediately, they liked it because in their previous math class, they had all this homework to do at home that was just the problem solving. And they oftentimes needed their teacher there, or they needed their classmates there to be able to finish it. Or, a comment that I got so much was like, my teacher would never know that I just spent an hour doing this problem set because I didn't even finish it, right? Because I got stuck somewhere. Whereas the video, when they watched that, it was more concrete. Like, I know how much time I'm going to need to do this video. I know how much time it's going to take to complete. If maybe they had a game or something like that in their schedule, they might double up on 2 videos before that, because they knew that they wanted to have 1 no homework night, and they were able to do that. So there was more flexibility built in for the learner too. And Yeah, so we just went with it the whole year. Every traditional lecture that I would have given was a video for students. And then we, did every day in class when class started, and this has always been how I've done it, is that the next day we start with a conversation, we start with a discussion. Now, when I started making the videos, I didn't have any technology available that allowed me to embed questions into the videos. When that technology started rolling out about 2 years later, that was really a big game changer. Now, when it started doing it, I didn't have Edpuzzle available.
What was
Now,
the tool, by the way, back in
yeah,
the day? What did you use?
when I started, I was just doing everything. So I record my videos in Camtasia, and Camtasia had a quizzing tool that was built in.
Oh,
And it was
wow.
okay. But you had to host it on their site, and it didn't give the same analytics. It wasn't as easy at all. It gave you an email report at the end. So it really was a game changer when I started using tools I actually was a Zaption user back in the day, but then I transitioned over to Edpuzzle. And, I just love the ease of the analytics. To me, using analytics, I know it rubs some people the wrong way. To me, it's information. It's information that informs my class needs and also informs students. When they get something wrong, they can replay the video right there because it gives them that option. They can go back and rewatch it, and just helps them know where they had a question. Because to me, that's really an important part of putting, when you say putting students in the driver's seat, it is literally I think about it as when you're driving a car. Until you sit in the actual driver's seat and you go and you're trying to navigate from point A to point B, that's when you know if you really understand the directions. Until you sit in that driver's seat, you might think that you know where you're going, but you don't realize until you're there, do I turn right or do I turn left at this road? It's a very different experience when you're sitting in that driver's seat. So how can I equip students to help them really be able to navigate that learning on their own? Yeah, that's a really important question. And obviously very important to you with your podcast title, because helping students know how to learn how to learn, is the most important thing that I can do, much more important than teaching math content.
Definitely. And you're definitely a pioneer with it. I mean, 2010, I mean, I can honestly, I think maybe one teacher posted a couple videos here and there, or I think around that time I started going on YouTube and looking up math or any other subject I was looking at. I think Khan Academy was, I think, right around that time, or when that started to occur. But it was definitely, there wasn't much around. I mean, and when we speak about accessibility, also these videos, especially if they all relate to the content and skills that you're teaching, it provides more equity and access. So speaking of tools, we had in the comments Alex and Lois there, who was Alex was a guest yesterday, and he asked, what platforms do your students enjoy the most? And that relates to our next question. What are your favorite accessibility tools? So, I mean, you've alluded to maybe some of them, but name off your top 2 or 3.
Yeah. So, I mean, YouTube is huge for me, putting the videos actually on YouTube, because I wish that I had started putting my videos in YouTube at the beginning. If I could say one thing that I wish I had done at the beginning, because so many learners go to YouTube. And now that my videos are on YouTube, I am able to help so many students from all over the place. And that is just so gratifying and wonderful. So I really do. I know it's, something that some people get hesitant about putting their video publicly on YouTube. But to me, it's been one of the most gratifying and wonderful things out there. A lot of college students watch my videos, and I'm able to hear from and help them. But paired with YouTube is Edpuzzle, of course, because that allows me to really give the interactivity through that. And it's exciting. YouTube and Edpuzzle are actually partnering I think we're going to see a lot more in that space soon, a lot more YouTube for education. I know it's blocked at some schools, and I think that's going to be an exciting improvement. What other tools are my go-to? Pear Deck. People always hear me talk about Pear Deck. Just how do we hear from every student's voice in the classroom? How do we allow students to type a response, the students who might need a little bit more time processing to get their thoughts out before we bring it to, that oral conversation on the board. I really love Cami too, as an all-in-one tool to really add video, add voice, add drawing, add text, make it not so linear for students. I think it's a wonderful tool. It also, in terms of accessibility, has a read aloud built in. You can adjust the language there too, and you can adjust the playback speed. Many things we've talked about. Moat, if we're just doing voice. And then Flip. Love Flip. Can't go without talking about Flip. Those are probably my top. I mean, there's other things for sure. I just did a talk earlier today about using Canva. Love that one too. But if I just had to pick some essentials, probably those ones that I just said: Edpuzzle, Pear Deck, Flip, Moat.
Yeah, no, definitely. Those are all amazing tools. And the fantastic thing is that when you utilize those tools, you can increase student voice, but also it's the age of formative assessment. So you can see in real time, how are students doing, and how can then you go support them. And, especially if you build up quite a bit of content in your class, you can have, a number of ways to, illustrate to students how to complete, worked examples of problems, which, is a research-based strategy that can help them, pick up the concept. Maybe the first worked set of problems wasn't the one that did it, but maybe showing them this other way, right? And it's something that I think that if you want to be a data-driven, instructor, then I feel like Pear Deck or Nearpod, as well as Edpuzzle the front load. And then when you're real-time synchronous, I like to use the more interactive slides to see the thinking in real time. But you could do that asynchronously as well, where it could be the front-loaded piece. So there's a lot of modalities, and what's nice is that the accessibility tools are already integrated within each of these, so you can implement various levels of accessibility. I'm looking really now towards. I'm hoping that some of the next big adaptation is that with Edpuzzle is or a tool similar to that, like YouTube for Education, based on your assessment score, the adaptability of the next piece that fits what you missed. It gives you that next, worked example or problem set that you can look at, and then you're assessed upon based on how well you do previously. So I'm hoping that is something with these new partnerships that we see, as that truly does help, I think, differentiate. And although the algorithms are not always the best, but I think that we're in that age where that is available. And I think that it's going to become more and more ever present, even in Google Classroom's recent updates this past year provide that. And also Quizalize as well. I don't know if you've used that tool, where essentially it creates a differentiation piece as a result of the school student score in a variety of different areas. So I think a lot is there. But your work has been with a lot of introverted students, getting everyone's voice involved. And we talked about student voice yesterday with the episode with Alex Isaacs regarding his virtual classroom spaces utilizing Moat and Wakelet and that work. Thinking of what you've done historically, was it through Pear Deck, or what type of strategies did you use to really get everyone involved? Maybe thinking more earlier on, and then moving towards where you were at the past couple of years.
Yeah. Pear Deck for sure. I've been a Pear Deck user since they were in beta, actually.
Wow.
And because that was something I was just looking for desperately. Again, just me as a student. It was what I needed. And I transitioned my warm up to using Pear Deck so that I could just represent a variety of approaches on the board. So many times in a math class, students think like, okay, there's a right answer, there's a wrong answer. But by me really emphasizing and putting this opportunity for students to just show their whole work on the board, I'm very lucky if people who've seen me talk, I show how I have these little Wacom tablets, and I have students actually handwriting. You were talking before about that real time, like that ability for me to see in real time students working, and for me to be able to project that on the board and to show just the multiple ways of thinking through a problem. It just helps students see that there's not a right and wrong way to do it. Like maybe we're all going to get to the same place at the end, but there are a variety of approaches there. But also giving students that time and the space to process, to think. For the students who are more introverted, for their approach to be able to be the one that's spotlighted, not for them to have to raise their hand first. And then I think there's a really critical component, and you were talking about this before, the peer-to-peer learning, right? So as we're able to see how everybody's thinking, because, it's really important to remember that everyone loses when we don't hear from all the different approaches and we don't see all the different approaches, right? It's not just the students who aren't able to share. That was like my thinking at the beginning. Like, I know that I felt like I wasn't measuring up as a student because I didn't get to share what I was saying. But as I now have students and I'm looking at that lens, I'm seeing, like that missed opportunity when we don't hear from a certain student in our classroom. It's a missed opportunity, not just for that student, but for everybody in the classroom, because we didn't get to hear from their perspective. We didn't get to see from their approach. And maybe they would present it in a different way that might help out somebody else, And so again, like, how do we see these different approaches? And back to that peer-to-peer learning, students have this level of empathy that like we can't possibly mimic as the teacher with our expertise at that point. And so students who are going through this struggle at the same time, I think they can learn so much from one another when we're able to give them a way to share with their classmates. So another tool that I really, really like here is Flip. And I think that, sometimes, again, like when we think about preconceived notions, you might think that a student who is more comfortable in Flip is that student who is more comfortable talking in the front of the room. And I found in all my years teaching that that's not always the case at all. Some of the students who make the longest video replies are the ones who are my quietest students. And some of the ones who really take leadership in class are some of the students who don't always step up for other leadership roles. So I think it's really putting the right tools in the hands of our students allows them to like shine in ways that we might never be able to see if we don't equip them with those tools. And I just really strongly believe in that. And that's really motivated a lot of my work.
Yeah. And I think that the tools are definitely that piece. But also I think in this question I'm going to ask you is that, what does it take though? Like how are you, scaffolding this? What are some of the ways that you're providing, strategies that are in real time? Like you have the slide or you have that prompt, but, how do you, really just, I call it integrate the strategy to amplify the tool, therefore their progression. So tell us a little bit about what some of these strategies that you use. Take me through like a sequence.
Yeah. And thank you for taking a step back, because it really does start with the lesson design and intentional use of these tools. Like I could tell you to use all these tools, but if you don't start with like your classroom philosophy, your style, whatever it may be, like I love flipping my classroom. Does it work for every teacher? No. Would I tell every teacher to do it? No. It works really well for me and my style. And maybe, a teacher wants to use some of my videos and make more creative things in the classroom that they're able to create. Whereas I really look to what other teachers have created for things that I want to implement during class time, because I spend more time on videos. So, I think that's also a really important piece, is like knowing yourself and spending time where you enjoy, because students are going to see that. Students always see that in what you do. They see what you are passionate about and what you enjoy. So, I think too, when we talk about all of these tools and how we're learning them to really make our learning active, it's not just about like, all right, let's just dig into Pear Deck. So Pear Deck isn't just about having students just type their response on the Pear Deck and that's it. It's not about them hiding behind a screen. It's not about changing from having a verbal conversation to one where everybody's just drawing their answer on their tablet and I'm showing that on the board. No, I think like to me, this is how I do my Pear Deck. So I'll start with a little warm up, check in, how's everybody doing? Very quick. And then from there, I have a couple of warm-up slides. Sometimes I actually move that Pear Deck into a student pace mode so that I can give everybody enough think time and they can kind of move through those slides at their own pace. So maybe I would do about 3 warm-up questions, not too much time, give some time limit to that. Not everybody's going to get to every question, but everybody's going to actively participate in some of the questions and they're going to maybe choose which questions they can get through. Because again, this is like a differentiated thing that, some students are going to get through 3 questions, have a couple minutes before we're able to even talk about it. And other students are going to struggle to get through too. So the point there is that, okay, so now I can put it in a student pace mode so students can kind of go through that, work through that. I can see in real time what they're drawing. I can see who's kind of having some problems. So I can walk around the room while they're doing that warm up component. And maybe the student who isn't starting just see like, why aren't you starting right now? Are things not good? Are you just like struggling or are you just goofing off right now? So I get a little bit of insight into that. And then after, we've had some pause time, then we bring it to the board for conversation. And that's where I'm going to call on some students. Some students are going to raise their hand. That might be, you might think of that as a more traditional approach. However, what I'm doing is I'm putting student work on the board. So instead of oftentimes, we start discussion in a classroom by saying like, okay, what should I do first? And then you draw whatever the student is saying, right? And then like, okay, what should I do next? And you keep writing as you're hearing what students are saying. And I think it's quite different when we actually project student work on the board because we see it differently. Sometimes what we are interpreting them saying isn't exactly what they're saying, but we've already written on the board, or just even their way of thinking through the problem might not be exactly how we're drawing it on the board. Also, we're able to see in a snapshot dashboard view, like a bunch of approaches. I can put, 5 different answers up at the same time. And so we can see the different ways of approaching a problem. And that same thing holds for like, if you're a history teacher, an English teacher, you can show like a variety of different ways of thinking through that problem. So just representing the various approaches to the problem. So to me, like that's kind of how I see it. So it's not just about the introverted students who are just typing. Also, I'm giving them a new voice by allowing them that time to think, to process. And maybe when I project their response, all of a sudden they're like, oh, I want to talk about it now because I'm proud of it. I'm more confident about it because you chose to highlight it, whatever it might be. And then there's students too who their Pear Decks are going to be sparse all the time. But when we start talking about it, it's like, okay, well, now that's how I think. That's where their thinking starts. Their thinking starts when they're saying it aloud. And I think that's very important too.
Yeah, I think that just providing that opportunity and then, looking at the worked examples or that modeling piece, the work, and that really helps in providing all those ways of how students are thinking. And you can scaffold that using, thinking routines or edge protocols or that type of thing. That's what I like to do. I usually scaffold using those types of strategies as well as possibly some cooperative learning strategies. For example, if it was online or in person, I'd have the students go to various corners of the classroom and talk to someone different about what their problem is on, and then they go back and finish that problem, then they do a subsequent problem before we'd share. So I think that there's so many different things that you can do. And Alex was talking about in the comments about how he did a lesson today in his math class, similar to what you mentioned. So, and I think that his students felt that there was much more of a, validation of themselves and more meaningful as a result. So, and this is something that, you know, it doesn't matter what skill, what grade level, as long as they have build these digital routines. Like any routine, you can incorporate this, you know, one tool and a number of strategies that go along with it that you can use for a wide range of skills that you're teaching. So I think that's really fantastic. So before we go, what advice do you have for educators right now regarding, you know, regardless of their context, you know, how should they be thinking right now to navigate the present and future of education?
Yeah. So we've talked about so many different tools today. And something that's really important to me to always share is that this has taken me years and years of my journey. I mean, I started with just making videos, and then I onboarded, you know, embedded the quiz questions in the videos. And then I started using Pear Deck. And so each year it was just a progression of a little step forward, but always starting with that problem spot first. Like, what is it that I really want to get into this year in my classroom? So if my problem spot was that, you know, I don't feel like I'm forming the relationships with every student. I don't feel like I'm really understanding all of their needs outside of just the math classroom, then maybe my goal that year would be to use Flip in order to have more conversations with students on non-math topics. And that was actually what I chose one year, exactly what I did. I just started asking, you know, I said, first I was using Flip for math solutions because I was like, okay, I need it for my math class. And then I was like, let me take a step back. Like, how can I hear from students on like how they're doing today, or you know, what they were doing on the sport field, or why they're nervous before a test, or why they're confident before a test. And just taking a moment to ask a 1 minute, you know, like do a 1 minute recording with me, that can be a really big game changer. But I'm not going to do all of these things. There's so many cool tools out there. There's so many that we could have named today and talked about. But and there's more and more coming at you every day. But I think it's really important to just take a couple of them to feel like they really fit into whatever goal you're trying to do. And then also, you know, that you feel confident about it and that students feel confident about it, that you're able to build it into your class routine so that students can feel comfortable and confident. Like, I'm not going to use Pear Deck for a day and then use a different tool for a day and then use a different tool for a day. Now, maybe for some teachers, they really shuffle their tools because, like, you know, they really gamify their classroom and they do a lot of this stuff. And maybe that fits into what you're going to do. So I'm not saying it's wrong. It's not me. For me, I'm a teacher of routine. Like, I'm going to help students build this routine of watching the video, doing the ed puzzle, coming to class, knowing that, all right, we're going to start with this Pear Deck and how it's going to start. We're going to do the collaborative work. And we're going to do some peer-to-peer learning through the Flip, you know, like, and that's going to be what I explain to students. And that's going to be what we do routinely throughout the year. And I'm going to just keep building in harder activities as we go on. And that's my approach. And that's what's worked for me.
Yeah, I think just the word that comes out of this theme that you were talking about just now is progression. And I think that meaningful progression, but, you know, think less is more in that progression. And to me, I think that over time, with if it's new strategies, new EdTech tools and integrations, that will go a long ways. And I think that, you know, dabble, progress, and you're going to ultimately get better at it, and your students will be. And it's, I think, a really good piece of advice. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, Stacey. I really, truly appreciate you being on with us.
Thanks for the wonderful questions. I really enjoyed this.
Definitely. And if you want to follow the podcast, you can check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Breaker, Apple, all the major podcast players, as well as my website at matthewrhodes.com. And you can also follow me on Twitter at mattrhodes1990. And what's the best way to follow you, Stacey?
Twitter is where I'm most active. I'm at BuddyXO on Twitter. I actually just started playing with Instagram and TikTok, but I'm very new to both of those. So if anybody wants to give me a follow over there, that would be great. I'd love to connect and learn more about those worlds. I'm also on YouTube, and that's where all my videos can be found. So you can just find me, Stacey Roshan.
Highly recommend the videos. I've used those for myself as well as teachers as well. So I continue producing content there. I think that really has helped a lot of educators. So
Thank you.
thank you so much for joining us, and check out the rest of the episodes. And I hope that you have a good rest of your week. And I hope that the content we've discussed tonight is meaningful and helpful in your journey as you navigate the present and future of education. Have a good one, everyone. Talk to you soon.